So what do we say to someone, let's say sitting right here with us, who's gone through a tragedy, God forbid? What do you say to someone who's literally going through that? And, they're not interested in us pontificating about happiness and so on. How do you approach it from a Torah point of view, a Jewish point of view, that considers happiness to be the natural state of a human being?
Right. Obviously, a person who's going through terrible suffering and comes to us for comfort wants an embrace. They're not looking for philosophy. They're not looking for theology.
Right.
They're looking for an embrace. They want someone who's empathetic, someone who shows he cares or she cares and is willing to share their misery, their suffering, their pain. Because when people ask the question, I remember for decades people were asking, why did God allow the Holocaust or some other major tragedy?
Right.
And I always realized that if I tried to give an answer, they got more upset. And I realized that they're not asking a question. A child stubs its toe. What does it do? It cries to its mother. An adult doesn't cry mommy, doesn't feel, well, I'm not going to cry, I'm an adult. So they ask questions, sophisticated questions. Why did God let this happen? They're really crying. Their soul is crying.
Good point. Yeah.
I want an embrace. God, give us an embrace. And that's really the only answer to the Holocaust, is to say, yes, we have every right to feel pain and to cry out to God, and God has to take us into his embrace. And that's what Mashiach is. Mashiach is where God embraces us after we suffered so much.
Yeah, I second that 100%, absolutely. I don't know who it was that said, a Rebbe once said to one of his suffering Chassidim who had suffered a great tragedy, he says, I don't have answers for you, but I can cry with you. And an interesting way, that crying with you gives strength. And in some ways, see, people think, again, joy, they think, and happiness is all external. If happy things are not happy, I'm not happy. But happiness is a soul state. It's a state of the soul. And that's what I see. When I see people, you're in awe of people who suffered, and they still maintain a certain dignity and presence, and they don't lose their faith. Because it's in a deeper place. It's not just because something good happens to me, I'm happy. And if something bad happens to me, I'm not happy. There's a continuous, a consistency that what I've always seen. And
I knew a Jew who was such a happy person. And then I discovered, he told us that he survived the Holocaust, he survived cancer, he survived the severe heart problems. And his doctors were already gone. And this man was always happy. And I can guarantee you that the happiness contributed at least to some of his miracles of survival.
You remind me of an article I read a number of years ago. I remember it was some magazine about a guy that the doctors had diagnosed him that he only has 6 months to go. He came originally from Greece. So he decided, with his wife, let me go back to my homeland, to some island in the Greek islands, and live out my life there, back to where I came from. Anyway, he lived more than 6 months, more than 6 years, more than 20 years. So the writer of this article heard about him and went to find him. He wanted to see what's the secret of his longevity. So he came to this island and he sees everybody lives there in their deep 90s. So at first he thought maybe it's the climate, but he says other islands are not that way. It's not like the Mediterranean diet or something. And he discovered after spending time there that there are no clocks in the town. No one's rushing anywhere. Their main focus is being with each other. They farbreng all day. And then they do some job. In other words, it's not measured on how much money you're making and so on. The whole town is that way. There's the deadline, that whole creation of that pressure, and people can just be with each other. They spend time talking to each other, socializing a lot with their children, with their grandchildren. Anyway, he came back to America, the writer, and went to interview the doctors, and they were all gone. So the doctors were long gone, and this guy's still. There's no question about it that there's. Everyone who says it when they go away from that urban dry, this craziness of this material world, everyone feels more at peace. But we're addicted. We are. It's an addiction.
A Jew who is totally involved, working hard, working 15 hours a day, and to eke out a meager living, or whatever else they're doing, and they can't stop doing that, but they can still be happy if they start their day in the morning with saying Moda Ani, the first thing you do when you get up in the morning is you express gratitude that you're alive.
Right.
I mean, we take everything for granted.
Right.
That's another way of saying how you can be happy. Stop taking things for granted. Be grateful that you're alive. Be grateful that you're a human being, that you have a purpose. Be grateful that you're awake and that you're conscious, because there are a lot of human beings who are not conscious. And be grateful that you have the ability to serve God, to have a relationship with God. Be grateful that if, in the case of a Jewish person, that you're Jewish. Special status of being Jewish. Be grateful that you can do the mitzvot, fulfill the commandments, which connects you to God. Be grateful that you make mistakes and you can correct them. God accepts you, embraces you even after you made your mistakes. And be grateful that you're living to now in an age when we're expecting imminently the coming of Mashiach. The whole world is going to change. And there's so many signs of it in society today. So, if you really think about it and you don't take any of these things for granted, you'll start dancing for joy. So you don't need to be on that island where you have no worries in the world and you're able to verbreng all day, even if you're part of the rat race, but you have perspective. You're really in a different world, even as you are in this physical world.
When the previous Chabad Rebbe was imprisoned and tortured, and he had plenty of reason to be sad, he says that when he contemplated on divine providence, that wherever you are, you need to be there, even if it's in a painful place. It's what gave him the strength to endure. Mm-hmm. I mean, of course, he's a Rebbe, but you hear the stories of, he wrote a whole thing called Tractate from Hell, the Sechta Gehenna.
Right, but he told these stories because he wanted us to emulate him.
Absolutely. And but you hear how he dug deeper and found that spark, I guess, that strength that was able to get through anything. It's hard to really, I guess, capture in a test tube. But those people that have that resilience, that have that spirit, at the end of the day, it's the spiritual power of the soul that gives a person the fighting chance to deal with the challenges of life. Because, look, let's face it, even from a Torah Hasidic point of view, life is difficult. No one ever said that this life is going to be easy. Now, for some people, it's more difficult than others. But the mere fact the soul comes to this world, we're told, is not a pleasant thing. I mean, Shammai, the great sage, says it's more pleasant not to be born than to be born. But it's more purposeful to be born. And when you discover that purpose, it changes everything, Yeah,
so what's the conclusion is that everyone has to make an effort to be happy in a meaningful way. And I'm not going to say you shouldn't entertain yourself. You have to drink sometimes once in a while. Judaism allows you to drink some wine on a holiday where that's an artificial way of getting happy. But it only works because there's an internal happiness that helps to reveal. But if you don't have that internal happiness,
yeah, of course,
it's
that's what I say. The drink is only to numb somewhat of the animal soul, so it shouldn't distract.
Right,
so you can access the inner.
But
joy.
if you have no relationship with your godly soul, because we're never taught about God, about religion, about Judaism. And when I said religion, religion is really a contributing factor to unhappiness. If the religion is the wrong focus, because religion makes people feel guilty. Religion tells you about God's vengeance and everything's so negative. Judaism, especially,
but that's a false one. That's not the true definition.
Within the Hasidic, especially within the Hasidic community, joy is like the essence of Judaism.
Yeah,
it's like, so one great Hasidic master said that the being depressed is not a sin. Technically, it doesn't say anywhere in the Torah, "Thou shalt not be depressed," but there's not one sin in the Torah that you won't commit through depression.
It's worse than a sin, right?
It's worse than a sin.
Yeah, they tell the story that Baal Shem Tov once went into a synagogue at Yom Kippur, and he hears the cantor singing a very joyous song. So he's wondering what part of the Yom Kippur service is so joyous. It's pretty serious. So there are sections where the high priest comes out of the Holy of Holies, and he notices, he's the confession of the sins. And the sins are quite pretty brutal, many of them. So he goes over to the cantor afterwards and says, I heard you singing a beautiful song, but how did you sing such a joyous song about the sins? It's not like some Torah material. So he says, what do you mean? Everyone has a job in the king's palace. Some people do one job. My job is to clean it up. I take a broom and I'm cleaning up the dust. What greater joyous experience is to clean the dust in the palace, to beautify it? So there's always the two sides to how you look at, the religion that's associated with neurosis and guilt and the punishment is we know that's not the Judaism that was meant to be. It's the way people distort it.
Right.
But the fact of the matter is, absolutely. I would say, about happiness, I think living a life of purpose and meaning and service and giving and gratitude and not focusing on your happiness will produce the greatest happy person.
Right.
That's the end of the day. As soon as you make happiness as your objective, you're already in the wrong place. People, we don't appreciate today, things have to emerge. Not everything, you can't pull a flower out of the ground. Water the ground and the flower will grow. Happiness is an outgrowth of what you do that's right. And the more you focus on what you're doing, the right thing you should be doing, the happier you'll be. As soon as you make it a commodity, you're not going to find it on a shelf, and you're not going to find it anywhere. That's how I would, we've said it in different terms, but that's...
Right.
So I'm sure we can go on and talk about happiness forever and ever.
Right, and there are so many degrees of happiness. So when you reach one level, there's another higher level, a deeper level, and ultimately we'll get to that very soon with the coming of Mashiach.
Absolutely. Great talking to you, and great
Same
talking
here.
about this topic, happiness.
Should do this more often.
I feel happier right now already,
Well, that's one way of being happy, talking about happiness.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, smiling.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.